Hi, I'm Brian Malow, and we are live from the 71st Annual Lindau Nobel Laureate Meeting in beautiful Lindau, Germany. I am quarantined because I unfortunately have contracted COVID, and we have very strict protocols at the meeting this year, so I can't mingle with everybody. But this meeting, because of COVID, is a hybrid meeting. There are some 600 young scientists participating. About 500 of them are here on the island, and 100 are participating online worldwide and interacting with 30 Nobel laureates. And joining me right now is one of our young scientists. So Alex Veinot is coming to us. He's not a PhD student for very much longer. And he's coming to us from Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. Alex, how close are you to your PhD?
Hopefully just another month and a week or two. But few people have some say in that. So hopefully they'll treat me well at the defense.
Yeah, but you couldn't have done this interview yesterday because you were finishing your thesis.
Finalizing the thesis and getting it sent to readers. Yeah, it's. I hear about some of the other young scientists that are attending in their first year, for example, and I'm thinking, wow, this would have been such a great meeting then, but here I am at the end, and of course, it's a really big, deal for when I start doing my postdoc research, of course, but timing wise, there's just so much to do at the end of a PhD that it's a little hard to sort of balance it all.
I can imagine, or maybe I can't imagine. But what sort of scientist are you? We're here at a chemistry meeting this year. How do you identify as a scientist?
Yeah, that's a question I've been grappling with, especially since doing my PhD, because I've bounced around a bit. So now I just tell people, yeah, I'm an organometallic chemist. So basically, that's just a chemist that studies carbon metal bonds. So you can't get much more, I guess, broad than that. It's kind of in all sorts of different areas of chemistry, but I got my start actually studying, the main group elements, so things like phosphorus, and that's my favorite element actually. And so I was doing a lot of really great phosphorus chemistry, and then that sort of transferred into more applied research with things like materials, and in this case, hard materials like metal surfaces. And then for my postdoctoral research, I'm actually doing more soft materials type research with polymers. So I'm looking at polymers of the main group elements next, and hopefully I can do something that encompasses all three of those in the future.
You just said something that I can't let slide at all. You said phosphorus is your favorite element. So you have a favorite
Yeah.
element. Why is it phosphorus?
So phosphorus,
Enlighten me. Yeah.
yeah. So phosphorus is really, I guess it's just great because there's so much great phosphorus chemistry that's been done. It's got a wide range of oxidation states, and really that allows you to prepare a variety of different compounds with very different reactivity. And so one of the favorite things that I've done in the past with phosphorus is used it to react with small molecules like dihydrogen. And so there's really not a lot of, at least there wasn't a lot of examples of main group elements reacting with these small molecules, because typically you would need d orbitals that the transition metals have to react and split things like dihydrogens. So that was really what got me interested in the main group chemistry at first. And I was able to show some examples with phosphorus, which were it's unpublished. That was just my undergraduate work, but my favorite thing about the compounds were actually their vivid red colors. So typically with like organic chemistry, if you're lucky, you might get yellow. But as soon as I hit, the phosphorus chemistry and I saw something like bright cherry red, I fell in love with the field and just went from there.
Yeah, take me back a little further and about your interest in science and chemistry. Did you always know you wanted to be a scientist? Was there a do you have a memory of how you first got hooked into science?
Yeah. So I'm actually the last person I think you would expect to be in science if you look back at my, early life experiences. So I was always getting in trouble in school, and I didn't like, disciplinary figures like teachers and things like that. I was very rebellious and, you know, have many detentions and stuff like that. But what really got me into chemistry first was my uncle was actually a police officer, and so I was interested in the properties of his bulletproof vest, which was Kevlar. And so, without much science knowledge, he just described it as a plastic that was stronger than steel. And that concept seemed wild to me at the time. And so I ended up taking my first chemistry course, and from there it just sort of snowballed into now I'm finishing a PhD. So
That's amazing. Yeah. Um, so now you described being an organometallic chemist and about something about those carbon metal bonds, but that doesn't really help me to understand what you do exactly.
yeah,
What do you do? Tell me something about your research.
yeah. So simply, I'll start very high level first. So typically, metals, they like to oxidize. For example, they're highly reactant. So one of the main areas that people use metal surfaces with are putting surfactants on them. So monolayers typically, which are just one molecule thick. And so for decades, sulfur-based ligands were the dominant class. But in the last decade or so, I'd say a new class of surface anchor has been introduced to the field, which are carbines. And so carbon really loves to have 8 electrons. So I think we all know about the octet rule, for example. But the really interesting thing about carbines is they only have 6 electrons. And so they're highly reactive species, but we're using a specific class of carbines that are stabilized and can react with metal surfaces. And they're actually better than the state of the art for other types of surface anchors.
Can you help me with
And
some? Now, I took chemistry and I was pre med, and I think I told you a couple nights ago. We had an online virtual meetup, and that's
yep,
how we first met a couple nights ago. And I found organic chemistry. That was my breaking point. My heart wasn't in it, and so I didn't do as well as the good student I normally was. But you mentioned so my basic chemistry. Anything I learned about it was a long time ago. But so when you say the octet rule, I know it has something to do with maybe in the case of carbon, it's maybe 8 electrons in an outer shell that's the most stable form. But maybe you could help me understand beyond that. Is there chemistry is really fascinating, and it's
I guess,
yeah.
yeah. So what would you like to know specifically, I guess?
I don't know. You so casually said. I think we all know the octet rule, and
Yeah.
it's like, well,
Oh, yeah. Just, that's sort of like high school chemistry, even just that. Yeah, like a lot of the, elements prefer to have 8 electrons in their valence shell. But, some elements, of course, go beyond that. So, for example, phosphorus can have, more than 8. But yeah, like, carbon really loves to have 8. That's kind of why all of the organic molecules, carbon has, 4 bonds to it. But, carbines just sort of flip that on its head. And carbon, for example, in a carbene only has 2 bonds. It has 6 electrons in its valence shell. So it's, highly reactive, but we've been able to tame it, in the last 30 years or so.
well,
And,
here's
it's really led to a lot of incredible chemistry. So,
yeah. I'll ask you one general chemistry question, and it's that idea of organic chemistry is basically the chemistry of carbon molecules. But why is it carbon? What is so special about carbon that it has this entire field? What is it that
yeah,
lends it to that?
I'll be honest, I'm biased. So, as a former main group chemist and studying that field, we always like to joke that carbon's not the rule, carbon's the exception. And so, a lot of the observations that you see with carbon chemistry, they don't really translate to the later elements in the periodic table. So, carbon being able to make multiple bonds, for example, is really one of those unique properties of carbon and some of the lighter elements like nitrogen. So when you go later in the periodic table, those multiple bonds become a lot more difficult to isolate, and they tend to actually self-react and produce things like polymers. And so, carbon has a unique set of properties that allow it to really adopt a lot of the structures that you see in nature that are, essential for life, essentially.
Yeah. So, is there a central problem you're working on, or a question you most want the answer to?
Um, Central problem, I guess. So for my PhD research, I've spent a lot of time thinking about metal surfaces and primarily how they oxidize and how we can prevent oxidation and protect the surfaces. And some of the applied research in that area we're actually doing now is related to semiconductor manufacturing, and so being able to put these molecules in specific locations on the surface and protect them from, say, depositing other materials. And so really that's how you get a lot of the really intrinsic patterns that are essential for semiconductors.
And
You
help me
know,
understand those implications when you say, trying to prevent that oxidation. Is that rust? Is rust a consequence of
so yeah, rust
oxidation?
is rust is a big problem. It's many billions of dollars, and repairing and replacing things like bridges and infrastructure. And so our group is actually spearheading a very substantial grant right now in Canada that's focusing on corrosion inhibition. But one of the really unique one of the unique aspects of this particular project too is it covers everything from the macro scale, so like large structures like bridges and things like that, all the way to nanoscales, things like atomically precise nanoclusters. And so, really, really tiny to really large is one of the really interesting things about carbines and why they're awesome is they can be applied to all sorts of length scales. And so, I'm really excited about this type of research, but I'm
Excellent.
ready to move on now. I'm finishing the PhD.
Do you, a big theme of this meeting always and built into the DNA of this meeting is mentorship. Have you in your career had any scientists who inspired you? I guess it could be two different questions. Any scientists who inspired you, or anyone who was a good mentor for you personally or professionally?
Yeah, and absolutely. So, I'm an Indigenous scholar. I'm a Mi'kmaq, and so really, there's not a lot of First Nations academics, and so I didn't have any mentors coming through, my various degrees. But what I really had to rely on to get this far was the mentorship of my supervisors. And so, my first supervisor was actually, not a well-known name, I would say. Just, I come from a small area, right? But my undergraduate supervisor, Bobby Ellis, was really instrumental in teaching me the fundamentals of synthetic chemistry and, really taught me how to be a scientist, I think, in the early stages. And I've since developed on a lot of those lessons. But, one of the key ones was being determined. And, if something doesn't work, you try again and you keep trying, right? They say in science you might have a success rate of less than 10%. So it's not for the faint of heart, but it's definitely worth it. And during my master's as well, my master's supervisor, Jason Masuda, was very supportive. And, he also really helped me develop a lot as a scientist, and really was instrumental in teaching me about other types of science besides just the small, niche main group chemistry I was working on. So I started thinking about other things related to materials, like, some molecular type wires, for example. And, there I fell in love with self assembly and crystallography. So, between those two ideas, I then started my PhD research here at Queen's, where I do self assembly on surfaces. And, I'm using carbene chemistry now. But my current supervisor, Kathy Crudden, is fantastic. She's been very supportive of me both as a person, as a scientist, and she's displayed exceptional leadership that I really look to follow when I start my own career. And she's also been very supportive in a lot of the other initiatives I've been part of during my PhD, centered around things like equity, diversity, and inclusion. So, I'm very um, active in promoting EDI in chemistry, and I come from an Indigenous background, and I really try to advocate for Indigenous participation in science here in Canada. So
Yeah, could you even elaborate a little bit more on that about what EDI actually means and uh, the implications of why you
Yeah, so I summarize it just basically. It's not about equality necessarily. It's about equality of outcomes, and so that's essentially what equity is and how you differentiate it from say equality. But diversity is one of those things that really helps improve science, and I've learned that a lot, especially here at my times in Queens. When I started, we had a group of I think 10 or 15 members, and there was 7 or 8 different countries among those 10 to 15 students, and you really learn a lot of different perspectives on chemistry and how to look at building molecules and how to understand what's happening with that. And we're not only diverse in say where people come from, but also what we study. So we had people that used to do say, sugar chemistry, and now they're working on metal surfaces. We have people that primarily did large macro chemistry with clusters and things like that, and now doing you know similar work, but still it really brings a lot of people together. And one of my fondest experiences I've actually been working with people in physics. And so we've spent a lot of time doing some really dedicated microscopy studies that wouldn't be possible with, collaborators across the hall in the physics department, as well as across the sea in the UK, for example. And really taking a detailed look at, molecules has been, it's been fantastic and not possible without having, a diverse team. So.
what a wonderful world we live in where chemists and physicists can work side by side.
I highly recommend making friends with your neighborhood physicists. I've really learned a lot about how to look at molecules, and sometimes I think they're crazy, and then they sell me on something, and I'm like, oh, I never saw it like that. And yeah,
Interesting. So you are participating virtually this year. We have about 600 participants, and about 100 of them are online around the world. And so there you are in Ontario. Um, and what's your experience of the meeting been? I mean, we're early on in the meeting so far, so I'm not sure you've had a chance to do very much yet. But tell me something about your virtual experience and what you're looking forward to in the rest of the meeting.
yeah. So it's been a little challenging, especially with the 6 hour time difference, and I can't do a lot in the early morning because I have a young son here and he sleeps through the night, so it can be a little challenging to try to make the time zones work. But I'm doing my best to keep on top of the recordings, which I greatly appreciate. And one of the things I'm really looking forward to in the meeting is the end discussion on diversity in chemistry, and I'd really love to hear the more of a global perspective on that. Um, Especially here in Canada, we've done a lot of great work, but the emphasis I think is going to be different in different countries around the world. At least in you know my experience talking with other people, in different areas, the emphasis on EDI can be different, and so I'd really love to hear other perspectives besides what we prioritize here in Canada. So
Yeah,
really excited.
so not only you had told me right before we started that it's very fortunate that there is this. There wasn't traditionally an online component to this meeting, but we had a couple years that had to be completely virtual, and this year it was a decision to make a hybrid to allow a lot of people to participate. That you, it would have been challenging for you to participate this year with every between your PhD thesis and your son. You told me.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm glad you've been able to participate this way. Um, is there something you wish more people understood about science?
Um, there's a few things. We kind of covered a lot of this at the trust and science discussion, though. One of the things is that we can be wrong, right? My family, I guess, I don't really come from a highly educated family. I'm the first person in my family to go on to university. My parents never finished high school, so they don't have any idea what I do. So it's really hard to tell them about some of the things I do and put it in that context. But they still think that science is simple and we know what we're doing. And the thing is, we don't. And that was one of the big things I remember in the pandemic first began is scientists say this and then they flip flop, and it looks like we don't know what we're doing, and it's because we don't. And they couldn't grapple with that that conclusion that sometimes things change. And so I spent a lot of time and a lot of discussions with them and with the rest of my family, just explaining things like the scientific method and how it changes with new information. And I think we really do need to do a better job of educating the public on just what science is and why it's important. Not necessarily the scientific concepts, but just have a general science in life, right? Like why do you need to know anything about science?
Like when people think there's a global conspiracy about climate change or evolution or something, there's a core idea of science that they don't understand. That if any scientist could disprove anthropogenic global warming, they would. It would make their career. It would, yeah. So.
Yeah, and that's one of the things too. Like we had the narrative "trust the science" pushed for many years, and people were saying, "Well, I did my own research," and it's like, yeah, you might have looked at a few things, but have you applied the scientific method? Is the key thing, and really, that's what it comes down to, and why I don't think we should trust anyone, and why I'm kind of uneasy with just how easy it is to misinform people in the present day, because it does get out there.
Well, isn't it slightly harsh to say scientists don't know what you're doing? I mean, that sounds a little harsh.
Well, I never know what I'm doing.
Maybe this is more of a personal thing.
Yeah, so I like to think it's like you just sort of play in a sandbox is how I look at it. Like some of us never grew up, and me being one of them. And so I treat lab work as really just going into play, and I get to try different things, and it's like my little sandbox. And most of the things don't work, or they just give you something that you can't interpret. But every now and then you get a hit, and that's what it's really all about, I think, is finding something new, and then that sparks all sorts of ideas. And sometimes it will get you a Nobel Prize, I guess.
Yeah. So, well, thank you so much. I'm glad you have been able to participate this year virtually, and thanks for taking the time to do this as well. Alex Veinot, very soon to be Dr. Alex Veinot. Thanks for participating, and he's just one of the 600 young attendees this year at the 71st Annual Lindau Nobel Laureate Meeting, and we'll have more updates for you coming soon. So thank you for tuning in.